Welcome. My name is Midshipman James Villanueva. I'm this year's Vice Chairman of the Naval Academy Leadership Conference. And to kick things off this morning, it is my honor to introduce Colonel Steve Lizewski, 86th Commandant of Midshipmen.
Okay. All right, well, good morning and welcome to day 2 of the Naval Academy Leadership Conference. Mr. Hart, thank you again for your generous support of the conference and for making this possible. I think yesterday was a great start to the conference. One of the neat things about it, I think, is the cross-pollination of ideas and the discussion that takes place in the breakout sessions after the large group. So whether it's a keynote or a panel discussion like we're going to see this morning, I think the real value comes when we can get the delegates together and to really talk through the ideas that have been brought forward up here on stage. Now this morning, I have the unfortunate position of having to follow last night's address by a Commandant of the Marine Corps and a Sergeant Major of the Marine Corps. And I'm speaking before we're going to get some combat veterans in here to talk to you about leadership under fire and leadership after being under fire. So before getting into that discussion, which I think really focuses kind of actions on the objective, if you will, in terms of how we might see it in the Marine Corps, what I thought I would do is give you a couple of thoughts from the perspective of leadership and the responsibilities of a leader who has to prepare a unit or prepare his organization to go forward and to go into combat. And the context I bring to this is having been a part of units that have gone to both Iraq and Afghanistan. I went through this process myself, and I would freely admit that we were not always entirely successful in our efforts to do those things, and some of those failures were certainly on my part. But I think the first and probably the most important thing that the leader has got to get right before he's going to take his or her unit forward, and I think this discussion today, it applies to all types of organizations. I think the context for many of the discussions today will be inside of a military environment, but we'll have a police officer up here. But it applies equally whether you're in the public sector or the private sector. All organizations at some point are going to face crises. And the crises inside of the military organization that we face is combat. But how a leader approaches preparing his unit for that moment of crises, I think there are some fundamentals, again, whether it's a military organization, another public endeavor, or a private company. But the first and most important thing I think that you've got to focus on as you prepare a unit to go forward into an environment that you know is going to be dynamic and potentially hostile towards yourself is focus on the character. Focus on the character of the individuals and the organization that's there. As we were preparing to go into Iraq back in 2006 as a battalion commander, with my Sergeant Major, we had an opportunity to take some time to study the problem set that we were being given. And we also had an opportunity at that point to look at successes and failures that the United States had had in Iraq up till that point. And the common thread that we were able to find, the really big problems that the United States had faced in Iraq, they were always traceable back to issues of character. And quite frequently, they were traceable back to a lack of moral courage, whether it was problems out in western Iraq or Abu Ghraib, things of that nature. It always seemed to come back to character. So we decided going into our preparations for our deployment, we knew that we were going to head into Al Anbar in 2007, that character was going to be the #1 priority inside of our battalion. And that may seem strange, Marine typically, hey, it's shoot, move, and communicate. And that absolutely was fundamental to what we were going to focus on. But we knew that if we could get the character element of it right, no matter what that uncertain environment we were going to face in Iraq threw at us, if we could count on and be confident that the individual Marines down to the private first class and the lance corporal, if we knew that we could count on them to make good decisions, we knew that we would be successful. So character really is the #1 priority for any organization, because ultimately I believe that character drives decisions and those decisions determine success or failure on the part of units. The other critical component, and the reason you've got to get that character piece right, as both Sergeant Major Kent And General Amos pointed out yesterday, success in combat and success in times of crisis depends upon a cohesive team. And in order for that team to be truly cohesive, there's got to be an element and a fundamental element of character that permeates throughout the team so that members of the team can trust one another, peers can look one another in the eye and understand that they have each other's backs, but more importantly, that the Marines can look above them inside of the chain of command and understand that their leaders will be driven by character, not driven by what's going to be best for themselves or some other selfish instinct, but a confidence that character is going to drive the decision-making inside of the organization. That provides the foundation for the trust that then enables the team to come together. And again, as Sergeant Major Kent pointed out yesterday, it is all about teamwork once you go forward into the unknown. So again, priority number one for us was character and character development. The second piece, and it's kind of a well-worn phrase, but it's one I think worth unpacking and really thinking about, is to be brilliant at the basics. I mean, too often I think as organizations look at what they have to do, they can become distracted by whatever might be the current fad. But at the end of the day, you've got to be good at the basics. And in order to really dissect what that means inside of your organization, the first thing you've got to look at is say, what's the mission? What exactly are you being told to do? Whether it is, again, a public organization, what are you being charged to provide to the government or to the local community that you serve? Or in a combat unit, what are you going to be required to do when you get on the ground? But start with the mission. And you've got to have a clear-eyed understanding of what that mission is. And in order to understand that mission, some of it involves getting into a discussion with your boss and making sure that you understand what his expectations are for you and of you. And then once you understand what that mission set is, the next piece that you've got to really dial down on and understand is what is the environment that you're going to operate in. So again, whether it's an urban area in the United States with a nonprofit organization or taking a Marine battalion into Al Anbar in 2006, 2007 at the height of the surge, what's the environment that your unit is going to have to function in, and develop an understanding of that environment and what is the relationship that your unit is going to have with it. The third piece, as you look to understand the mission, is to make sure you have an appreciation of whatever the enemy is that you're facing. So in combat and in a combat environment, that's it can be a fairly simple proposition. That may be a little more nuanced and actually a little more difficult to discern when you're talking about, again, an organization that may be focused here in the United States. But what is that threat to the organization? What's the threat that is out there that stands in the way of you and successful accomplishment of your organization's mission? And then once you've got that understanding of the mission that you've been given, the environment that you've got to operate in, the forces that are going to oppose you, you got to really take a hard look at yourself and make sure that you have a decent self-awareness of both yourself as an individual leader, but more importantly, an understanding of the capabilities and limitations of your unit. And then based on that understanding, then you can form that vision, that all-important vision of success for the leader. So what does that organization need to look like when the mission is accomplished? And once you've developed that picture inside of your head, the challenge for the leader is to communicate that vision widely across the organization so that every man and woman inside of the organization understands and develops that common vision of success. And then the hard work in preparing the unit is, if you know what you need to look like at the end of the day, work your way back from there and figure out how you get there. And quite frequently, it's work. I mean, there's no secret to it. To achieve a successful outcome in a challenging environment, the truth of the matter is that it's hard work. There are really no shortcuts. Sometimes people look for, hey, what's the easy way to get this thing done? I think you don't necessarily have to look for the hardest solution, but too often we get overly fixated on trying to find the easiest way from point A to point B, and we lose sight of the fact that at the end of the day, it's all about hard work. So again, if you focus on character, you focus on the individual requirements, what are the requirements that your unit needs to be good at in order to succeed, I think those are probably the two most essential elements as you get ready to go into a time of crisis with whatever organization it is that you might be leading. The last and the final consideration that I think you need to have inside of any organization that's going to go forward is to prepare for failure. To prepare for failure and to prepare for loss. Because if you're going to go into a fight or you're going to go into a competitive environment where people are going to oppose you, you inevitably are going to suffer and sustain setbacks. And that's one of the more difficult things to face as a leader, but you owe it to the organization to have that kind of clear-eyed understanding. And then you need to develop inside of your team a couple of things. One, you've got to develop resilience. So you have to be able to, and resilience, I think there's two components to it. One is just perseverance. And the other one is an understanding of how your unit's mission fits into kind of the larger picture, and hopefully you ignite inside of the hearts of your subordinates that fire that will give them the drive and the perseverance to continue on when they're facing difficult and dangerous circumstances. If you can get that part of it right, if you can begin to build resilience inside of your unit or your organization, you're going a long way towards achieving success. The other two pieces as you prepare for loss or for setbacks is how are you actually going to deal with failure inside of the organization. We talked quite a bit about it yesterday. I think General Bolden provided some great examples of failure at the NASA level. But there has to be an understanding inside of the organization that when we fail collectively, but when we fail and we fall, we're going to fall forward. And that when we fail, we are going to make a deliberate effort to learn everything we can from that particular failure so that we can drive forward with greater success in the future. But you need to get over the fact that, hey, we're going to go forward and we're not going to fail. Because if that's how the organization is going to measure success, you won't achieve it. Or your expectations and the bar has been set so low that the organization that never fails is never really trying to achieve much of any particular meaning. You know, when you talk about preparing your unit for loss or failure, the other thing that you've got to do is you've got to build a bench. You've got to build a deep bench inside of your organization so that literally the next man or woman up can step forward should you sustain one of those losses for whatever the reason may be. People may leave your organization because of other job opportunities. You may suffer losses in combat due to contact with the enemy. But you, as the leader, before you go into that time or that moment of crisis, you have to develop the bench so that somebody can come forward. If you take a look at the Navy football team this year, you know, and I think too often maybe sports is used as an example of leadership, but that team this year was an example of exactly that. So by the end of the season, we had a fourth-string quarterback competing in a bowl game. And on his very first play, he ran it in for a touchdown down at the Armed Forces Bowl. But that sort of success, the idea that no matter what the external environment throws at you, you've got to have the next person ready to step up and take the mantle of leadership or assume those responsibilities that were being placed on the shoulders of the man or woman that you just lost. But if you can do those things, you know, again, focus on character first, have a clear understanding of the mission that you're going to face, focus on the basics, the most fundamental things that you need to be successful in a particular mission set and inside of a particular environment, and then build your organization so that it is set and ready to sustain losses once you go into contact, I think you'll be set up for success. And I offer that really as maybe an introduction and a way to begin framing what you're going to hear in just a few short moments. Now I'm going to be followed by a pretty distinguished panel. The panel lead is Colonel Art Athens. You know, we'll get a detailed introduction on him, but my personal connection to Colonel Athens is when I found out that I was going to go into this job, I got kind of elbowed and folks said, hey, you better go talk to that guy. And I will tell you that you are all lucky to be able to have Colonel Athens up here. He comes with a wealth of knowledge and a wealth of experience. Served for over 30 years as a Marine, commanded Marine units in both the 3rd and 4th Air Wings, 1978 graduate of the Academy. He was actually the brigade commander while he was here. So the success that Art has enjoyed is certainly nothing new to him. And as an organization, we're extremely fortunate to have him here. I'm proud to call him my friend, and I think you'll all benefit from how he'll lead us through the panel today. So again, I encourage you throughout the day today, once we break out of the sessions here in Mahan, to continue to have those candid discussions. And hopefully yesterday you got through the initial barriers of figuring out who's who in the group. Every group kind of takes on its own dynamic, but there's always somebody who's got a question, there's always somebody who's got a comment, and there's always somebody who can crack a decent joke. Hopefully you figured out who those people are inside of those groups. And today you can really get into the substantive discussions and talking about and bringing your own perspectives to the topics that we'll introduce in the large group sessions today. So good luck with the rest of the conference. I look forward to seeing you throughout your time here. And as the Commandant of Midshipmen, welcome to the United States Naval Academy. If you get the chance, and this is not saying that you can skip out of any of these sessions in here, but when you get the opportunity to do so, please take a look around the campus. And if there's something that you're interested in or want to see while you're here, please don't hesitate to pull one of the mids aside and ask them to show you it, or ask the questions that you've got. We're pretty proud of this place, but this is an American institution. So anything we can do to open it up and to help you when you leave here, not only leave better prepared as leaders for the challenges that you'll face in your own lives, but also leave with a better understanding of this place. We stand ready to do it. Okay, thank you.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Panel 2, Leadership Under and After Fire. As the Commandant mentioned, my name is Art Athens, and I have the honor of serving as the Director of the Naval Academy's Stockdale Center for Ethical Leadership, named after Admiral Jim Stockdale, Medal of Honor recipient, prisoner of war in Vietnam for 7.5 years, and quite a man in his lifetime. Our focus on this panel is to explore the challenges of combat and crisis leadership before, during, and after an event. How do leaders prepare themselves and their followers for the stress of these kinds of situations? How do leaders direct their people during their situations where there's a high risk of injury or death? And how do leaders attend to the people after the event is over? What responsibilities does a leader have to bring his or her people back whole, W-H-O-L-E, physically, mentally, and emotionally? I'm going to repeat something that the Commandant mentioned. Though this focus seems to have an emphasis on the military and law enforcement, I encourage you who are going to serve in other ways, in education, business, nonprofit, to listen carefully, because the same insights you will hear this morning apply when you have an oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico, or a shooting at your elementary school, or a vehicle you build killing people because of a faulty device, or your food poisoning your clientele. Life and death crises are not limited to the military and law enforcement. We're honored to have with us on the panel today, from my right to your looking out at the audience from right to left, Major Mathew Lampert, U.S. Marine and the Naval Academy's 22nd Company Officer, Mr. Jim Perry, a former Marine and the American Red Cross Service to Armed Forces Regional Manager, Captain Elliot Latchaw, Baltimore County Police Special Operations Section, and finally Senior Chief Petty Officer James Hatch, retired Naval Special Warfare Operator and founder of the nonprofit organization Spike's Canine Fund. And the last panel participant at the end there is Mina, who is Senior Chief Petty Officer Hatch's dog. And we'll give Mina a chance to share their thoughts as well. So my intent on this panel is to have each of these distinguished individuals provide a brief opening statement about this subject. And they were given the freedom to talk about any part of this, the before, the during, the after of crisis. And they'll each have their own twist on that, I think, as they share. And then we're going to open the floor to questions, as happened in the panel yesterday, and then I'll wrap up with some closing comments. But to me, these panels are always a unique opportunity to hear from a variety of people and the questions that you can ask them to improve your leadership capacity and capability as you leave the Naval Academy. So we'll start with Major Matt Lampert. I'm going to give a little bit more of an introduction for each of these individuals so you have a perspective on who they are. Major Lampert enlisted in the Marine Corps and served 4 years as a radio operator and scout sniper team leader before entering the Naval Academy, where he graduated in 2006 and commissioned as a Marine Corps second lieutenant. Major Lampert is an infantry officer who initially served with the 1st Light Armored Reconnaissance Battalion as a detachment commander and a company commander. Selected for assignment to the Marine Corps Special Operations Command, he has served as Commander, Marine Special Operations Team 8133, Executive Officer, Marine Special Operations Company C, and Commander, Marine Special Operations Company C. Major Lampert is deployed around the world, including to Afghanistan and other areas in the Middle East and Western Pacific. He returned to the Naval Academy as a company officer in April 2015. His personal decorations include the Bronze Star with Combat Distinguishing Device and Gold Star in lieu of Second Award, and the Purple Heart. Please join me in welcoming Major Lampert.
Hi. I'll start my remarks sort of at the back end of a combat experience or a high intense experience, because I think that oftentimes that's the part that gets most overlooked and can sometimes often be the most challenging to, I don't know if solve is the right word, but can be the most challenging to deal with over long term, and ultimately maybe from a non-physical standpoint can sometimes be the most destructive to have to deal with. I think one of the keys to sort of understanding that as from a leadership perspective is to understand that traumatic events, combat or otherwise notwithstanding, there is going to be a ... at the end of that. There's going to be an aftermath. There's going to be a post-stressful event, a post-combat healing process. That could be mental, that could be physical, that could be both. As a leader, I think you need to go into that with eyes wide open for sure, and understand before you ever even engage in training for combat or conducting combat that's going to be a part of your regimen. So certainly knowing how to use your weapon systems and knowing your tactics, techniques, and procedures before combat is a huge important part, but knowing that after combat, and oftentimes if combat lasts a long time during combat, you as a leader are going to have to do something to allow your troops or those you're responsible for to digest the experiences that they are going to have. So that's kind of my first super insightful bullet for you there. I'll use a little bit of examples from my second time in Afghanistan to kind of illustrate that a little bit. Sometimes the need to decompress from combat needs to happen like right now, because people's mental and physical reactions to that are severe, and if you don't digest it, that's going to manifest itself in negative behavior, and you as a leader have got a responsibility to stop that. Unfortunately, sometimes combat or whatever we're doing, traumatic or stressful event, isn't going to allow us the time to do that. And so you got to put it aside. I'll use a little bit of an example. In 2012, in the middle of the night in August, I got a call on the phone that said that one of the teams we had operating in the northern part of the Helmand River Valley, their team commander, their team chief, and their explosive ordnance disposal technician had been assassinated, essentially, by an Afghan policeman who we were working with at the time. So the team's leadership has now been wiped out, and in a particularly violent and dramatic fashion, which was very taxing on that team's mind. So I flew up there in the morning and tried to help out. And this is not a story of Major Lampert comes to save the day, not at all. The Marines in that team handled everything just fine without me. But I think that the story illustrates a little bit of when we first got up there, given the sort of strange dynamics we had with 14 Marine special operators and their attachments working with, for lack of a better term, characters from Pirates of the Caribbean who were Afghan security forces at that point in time. It was kind of a tenuous situation, and there was not, that particular night was not the time to take a pause, and it was not the time to digest the experiences that they had, which is to see the people that they had cared for very much killed in a particularly brutal fashion, executed, for lack of a better term. We needed to continue on with the job. We needed to make sure that we didn't jeopardize the relationships we had with security forces up there, so that this tragedy didn't become a larger, wider tragedy with the forces we'd had working in that region, and jeopardize the good work that lots of folks had spent considerable time and potentially some of their lives working to achieve. On the flip side, though, when I got up there, I started to think real quickly about, well, when are we going to provide some time to decompress, and when are we going to look at digesting the events that have happened? And I think in retrospect, I did a terrible job of that, because I got swept up right away in solving immediate problems, trying to improve some security, trying to mend relationships, trying to make sure that people in the village that we were working with were not worried that we were going to go out the next morning and slaughter them, and trying to keep the momentum of the work we were doing. The end result, and I'll fast forward and get to some other points, and we'll get to some of the other better speakers than me here in a second, is that I had essentially overlooked that point. I went up there and said, hey, I'm going to do this. I didn't end up doing it. And we just sort of soldiered on and continued and pushed ourselves and did what Marines are kind of known to be doing, which is sort of, pull your trousers up and keep on going. And the deployment finished fine, and honestly, there was really no sort of obvious signs of cracks. But honestly, years later, in the unit that I stayed with and did some subsequent deployments with, almost to a man, myself included, all of us, because we never took the time to ask ourselves, what are we doing? What did we see? How did we feel about it? You could see some manifests in behavior. So I had one of the counterintelligence Marines that was working up there that was badly wounded that night. He definitely manifested some severe alcoholic dependency issues that lo and behold, no surprise, cropped up about the first week of every August, pretty much every year, this year included. And that's a result of my failure in leadership to sort of take the time and allow and provide some pathways for folks to digest things and decompress and talk about ways that they could comprehend what they've seen. Other things I think that are important a little bit as leaders is that your responsibility, I think, very much as leaders is to do two things. One, I think, is to provide resources for the mental and physical rebuilding of folks after they've seen a traumatic event. And the whole gambit of those resources is huge. We could talk about it a little bit maybe during the questions, but it's kind of beyond the scope of this here. Some of those resources include like the dog that's over there on the other side of the table, to just talking, to just decompressing in terms of getting out of that environment, to professional mental and physical health. And I think there's lots of folks in the crowd here that could figure out what those are. But you've got a responsibility as a leader to make those resources available in terms of setting out time for a schedule, pulling in those resources, engaging military or bureaucracy or whatever state or local agencies you're working with, their resources, and making them available to the folks you're responsible for. And then I think the second thing is, as a leader, you've got to set the example. If you make resources available in mental or physical health, and then through either your actions or your body language, don't use those resources or make those resources seem as if somebody is doing something less or compromising their manliness or their soldierly virtue, then you're not setting a good example, and you're going to have those problems manifest themselves. I think that's almost a guarantee. Two more points, and then I'm done here. The Marine Corps has got a great tradition of conducting, after every operation, what's called an AAR, an after-action review. And I think simple things like an after-action review post-combat, or even in the middle of combat but post a high-intensity incident, can be phenomenal ways that you can lower the overall tension and allow people to digest and understand things that are going through. An after-action review is, I think, in the simplest cases, can be you and your unit, you and the folks that you're responsible for, getting around saying, what just occurred? What happened? How did we respond positively, negatively? What things can we do better so that if whatever traumatic happened doesn't happen again and doesn't further traumatize our minds and bodies? That's important. A lot of people don't do that for, I don't know, because it calls into question. Maybe it calls into question my leadership. Maybe I made bad decisions, or people in my team made bad decisions. Those need to be talked about. Those can't be hidden away in some sort of mask of hey, I don't want to expose myself for the bad decisions I made, and so we're not going to talk about things. Well, if you don't talk about things, they can never be solved, and problems that don't solve become bigger and bigger problems later on down the line. I'm a firm believer that the human body was never really designed to handle some of the trauma we expose it to on a daily basis in our inner cities, in disaster responses, in combat, in all the myriad things that happen in this world. Your body, I think, naturally will demand to respond to it. If you don't proactively take the time to manage when that response happens, the response is going to happen whether you like it or not, and oftentimes it's going to happen at inopportune times, if that makes any sense. So if you want to have any kind of measure of control, either as an individual or as a unit leader, I think one of this management technique needs to be a part of your, for lack of a better term, the military term of a battle rhythm, a cycle of how do you do operations. Yeah, I'll finish up here by saying, and my only experiences come from combat, in that when you're doing your after action, I would ask everybody to remember that combat is not a single dimensional event. there are many good things that happen during combat operations. Oftentimes dramatic, they can be life-changing, soul-changing, they can ask you, they can make you think about yourself, you can see folks, guys and gals, do tremendous things, tremendous acts of bravery, tremendous self-sacrifice. And I think that what needs to be remembered a little bit is that none of these events are purely bad or purely good, and recognizing the unique nature and the dynamic nature of these events is important to get a little sense of perspective and context on these things. Otherwise, you risk sort of putting things into bland categories, and they're not always going to fit in sort of unique, little, interesting compartments. So challenge yourself to look at, maybe after a particularly challenging or horrible event, to look at the bright side of things, things you did well, even in an otherwise poorly done firefight, things other individuals may have done well, or events that may positively impact things, not just the negative side. Close it up and hand it off to somebody else. Thanks.
Thank you, Matt. I'm going to introduce Mr. Jim Perry now. Jim joined the American Red Cross as service to the Armed Forces Regional Manager in June 2015. In this role, Mr. Perry oversees volunteer activities in 7 military treatment facilities in the greater Chesapeake region, as well as manages efforts to support the well-being of veterans, military members, and their families. Previously, he was a teacher in Baltimore City and served in the Marine Corps Reserve with 4th Light Armored Reconnaissance Battalion and deployed to Iraq as part of the Dam Support Unit 3, whose mission was to provide security for the Haditha Dam and conduct small boat and riverine operations during Operation Iraqi Freedom. Mr. Perry holds a bachelor's degree in sociology from McDaniel College and a master's degree in secondary education from Grand Canyon University. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Perry.
Well, thank you very much for having me here. And going off what the Major to my left was saying, I was going to touch on what he was saying. I think he covered it. But one thing I'll add is if you as a leader in high stress or in combat situations are not acknowledging the fact that the mind needs to be treated like the body in terms of taking care of it, then if you don't acknowledge that, you're essentially lying by omission, and you're letting down those who you lead. I was in a play called The Telling Project a couple years ago where veterans shared their stories about their experiences. And it doesn't have to be combat that creates a stressful experience in the military or in your life afterwards. And one statement that I came out with was that we're human beings doing human things and having a human experience and a human reaction. When I came to terms with that after my deployment, it was a lot easier for me to understand kind of what I had done and where I was going, and that there was nothing wrong with having a reaction. As a leader, I would strongly recommend that you know what resources are available to you and to those whom you lead, because having those resources in the military and having those resources after the military, it's needed. Transitioning out of the Marine Corps, I thought, hey, life's gravy. Well, when I got into education, ended up in Baltimore City, I didn't end up in the greatest of schools. And quite frankly, it became a dangerous situation there, and you had to lead and be led. And you looked to your leaders in that school system to provide you the resources to manage what you were doing and to kind of basically keep it together. And then your students were looking, or my students were looking to me for that leadership as well. Because if they had to make their way home through the riots, which they did, they came back to me the next day saying, why did this happen? And then they were looking to me to make it okay. I didn't really know what to tell them. And I failed. I wasn't prepared for that. So when I was able to kind of digest that and come back to them a day later, I didn't think that what I was telling them was giving them the proper tools, but they understood it. They were able to kind of digest it and move forward because they already had a lot going against them in their own lives, in the school system that was supposedly serving them, and they needed to make it to high school. And in the military, your individuals who you're leading, your soldiers, your sailors, your airmen, your Marines, they need to make it through the day, they need to make it to the next day, and they need to make it to their re-enlistment date or their EAS date, or they need to make it to their retirement. And their families need them to do that too. So I would first of all say that know what the resources are before and after these deployments, and before and after. All right, so that's kind of your tangible, because I think everybody in here is very capable of turning on a computer or a smartphone and going into Google. So I'd almost call that the easy part. I think the hard part is while you're there. If you're deployed and you're in a stressful situation, combat, supporting combat, which I did a little bit of both. My combat experience is a drop in the bucket compared to the gentleman right here. But I did have a taste of it, and it does affect you, and it does change you. But that's not the only thing that will affect and change a human being in this world. I listened to a TED Talk by a guy named Michael Penny. I don't know who's familiar with him. I would definitely look it up. He runs a podcast called Sea Stories and Cigars. And he did a talk where he said, bring value to the situation. And I found that really, really interesting point. I consider myself lucky to have watched that yesterday because a friend of mine shared it with me, and I'm going to pull from that. I could look at anybody in this room and I could look at myself in the mirror and say, hey, you bring value to this situation. Some may know how to do that. Some may not. And some may know how to do a lot of things that they're supposed to be doing, and some may not. And people look to their leaders to help with that. If I walked up to my CO or said, hey, sir, hey, man, we need X, Y, and Z. This is the material that we need. They can get that. But can they help that junior Marine or junior sailor understand what value they bring? Another person you should probably look up would be Major Michael Weston, United States Marine Corps and DEA. Fascinating individual. He was my executive officer. While we were in Iraq, they actually took a platoon from Haditha Dam and put them in Ramadi. And this was 2006, 2007. And we were supporting the operations that were going on there. And we were just one platoon. He was the company XO, and then he basically, even though he was holding that billet, became the platoon leader. So we worked with him on a platoon level, and it was outstanding. And the war in Iraq had its political debates back and forth. While you're there, if you're in a junior, enlisted Marine, which I was an E3, you're standing fire watch at 02, and then you're sweeping the hooch, and then you drive your truck, do your mission, go back. It can definitely make you wonder what value is in going on and where you are. And people you lead in any situation, whether it be military or whether it be civilian or anything, combination, you need to help them find the value, because that's going to help them be able to feel like they should be getting the assistance when they need it. And I know that sounds a little bit strange to say, but at the time, Captain Weston sat us down and just basically explained to us why what we were doing was important, why the role we were playing was important, and even found each and every Marine in the room and said why it was important that they were there, what they brought to the table. And I can tell you from that experience, I walked away, and that man had shown me what value I brought to the situation, and I understood that a year and 2 years later and 3 years later when I was working through my transitional struggles. Because I understood what value I had, and that helped me know what value I had in the moment now. So yes, we should have the resources available. We should know how to refer those that we lead to the proper resources and be willing to use them ourselves. But it's also what we do while we're in that deployment, while we're in that training environment. It's what we do then as leaders that helps these people we lead understand what value we bring. And that kind of definitely helps with the mindset. So when later on they do need to go get that help, they may have a little leg up in the situation. They may understand why transitioning is hard. But they also know what they bring to the transition. They know what they bring to the next stage of their life. Because the trickiest thing sometimes for a transitioning military member is, what do I do now? What value do I have now? Well, if you understand what value you had then, it's a lot easier to understand what value you had now. And that goes a long way. I would definitely say that. And one thing to mirror what was said to my left is that problems that are not addressed do become bigger problems. But a little secret about that is they also start becoming other people's problems. and that's not necessarily fair. So in terms of understanding how to take care of yourself, you also need to understand down the line that there's a future spouse, there's a future friend, future family member that you need to think about whether or not you take care of yourself, how that will or will not impact them as well. That's what I got.
Thank you. Our next panelist is Captain Elliot Latchaw. Captain Latchaw joined the Baltimore County Police Department in 1994. In his initial years with the department, he served as a patrol officer, precinct-level investigator, and undercover narcotics agent. As a corporal and sergeant, Captain Latchaw supervised patrols, a violent criminal apprehension squad, and a violent crime investigative unit, and also served as an operator on the tactical team. As a lieutenant, he supervised a patrol shift and a county-wide burglary investigation unit. Upon promotion to captain, he was assigned to the Special Operations Section, where he currently oversees the tactical, canine, aviation, marine, hazardous devices, underwater recovery, special response, and hostage negotiation teams. And I also should add that his son, Nick, is in the audience as well, who wants to be a future Navy lacrosse player, so we're recruiting him later in the day. Please join us in welcoming Captain Latchaw.
Thank you, Colonel. First of all, I'm so humbled to be here, and I just want to thank everybody for their service and the sacrifices they've made. I do appreciate it, and the sacrifices that you will make in the future. You know, I come from a Navy family, but I took the road of law enforcement because it just kind of fell in my lap, and I've never looked back. So, I mean, these guys, the points they make are so spot on, and I can sit here and give you cliches about, you know, leadership's not just words, it's actions, you got to get down in the trenches, lead from the front and all that. And it's so true, though. You know, I'm going to tell you a couple examples, give you a couple stories of things I've experienced that hopefully will help you out and give you some perspective. The world of law enforcement has changed so dramatically over the last few years, from being you know, a noble profession where we were respected to now we're criticized and really almost criminalized, you know, and being attacked and murdered. So it's crazy. But the good people in the world still really appreciate us, so that keeps us going and keeps us moving forward. So years ago, when I was a sergeant on the SWAT team, I came to the team, and you can imagine the personalities on the team. You know, we're pretty much a Tier 1 team capable of a lot of high-speed stuff. You know, hostage rescues, explosive breaching, sniper operations, handling heavily armed people, barricaded criminals, mentally ill, you name it. So there was 2 squads on the team at the time, and one squad had a lot of the older members, guys that have been there, tenured for a while, and my squad was a lot of the younger guys, but I still had some of those seasoned, experienced guys. And essentially, one mentality was go hard at them. You know, the tactics back in the day was take the fight to them. And that was great while it was successful and while it worked, but I had a team leader on my side named Dan Rose, if anybody knows him. He's a great man, and he started bringing tactics to the team that were more slow, more methodical, more deliberate instead of dynamic. And it was met with a lot of resistance. So ultimately, there came a time where that go hard at them mentality cost the life of one of our members. On August 28th, 2013, Jay Schneider was shot and killed doing a high-risk entry for a murder suspect. So that rocked our world. And as a result of that, when you want to know about, you know, what leadership does in those situations, well, in the interim of those years I was there and Jay being shot and killed, 2 months into my assignment there as a sergeant, our lieutenant died of a massive stroke. So we had to transition from that into a new lieutenant. That new lieutenant, not to be mean or degrading, was weak. He was afraid of conflict. Super nice guy, would never hurt you, but he was not a leader. Ultimately, he wound up retiring early, leaving the department. Not as a result of JJ, happened after him. So then we got another lieutenant, and in the interim of that, I was promoted out. That new lieutenant wound up washing out, and now there's a lieutenant in there who I oversee, who does a good job. But where I'm going with this is, the ability for you as a leader to be there for the guys. There's no cookie cutter answer with regards to how people will respond to adversity and tragedy. You've got the tough guys, the guys that want to be there, that have the courage, that comes automatically. But you have a lot of personalities to deal with. So what I would tell you is, in those situations, first of all, you have to be there for your people. You can't ever just assume that they're okay. You can't ever just think, this will pass, whatever. Just like those conflicts that were created with regards to one squad wanting to keep that dynamic type style of tactics and my squad wanting to adopt a more deliberate style. Leadership was absent for that. They were relying on the informal leaders, the tenured guys, the guy that they thought could run the unit, who really didn't have any actual authority to get things squared away. And it didn't work out so good. So one of the most important lessons we learned from that is that you have to then, as leaders, not be afraid to step up and make changes. And after Jay's death, the new major that's in charge of that unit made a lot of tough, difficult decisions and brought about a lot of change. He didn't do it in a vacuum, though. He did it by listening and talking to his people, finding out what was working, what wasn't working, meeting with people even outside of our unit, discussing things with people from other agencies, people from other walks of life, to find out how do we go about doing this and making it successful. And I will tell you this, while those decisions were difficult and they weren't popular with everyone, what was interesting in the end was, behind the scenes, there were a lot of supporters of the major. There was a lot of people that were in agreement with what he was doing, but on their face, they were afraid to come right out and say that. They were afraid to come right out and say, that's spot on, what you're doing is right, for fear of being chastised by that informal leader, that tenured officer who was in the unit. And ultimately what happened was, these changes came about. The guys that didn't agree with it got a little bent out of shape, and most of them left the unit. And while some experience walked out the door, some value walked out the door, ultimately, we're in a better place now, a much better place. And if you were to take a poll right now of that particular unit of our SWAT team and ask them what they think about the tactics that we have employed right now, every single one of them will tell you that we are so much better now, so much better off, because in the world of policing, where now you have to take in all these things with regards to liability and the criticism that we face now and the scrutiny and the Monday morning quarterbacking, I welcome it. Bring it on, because I'll take anybody on head on, and I will dare you to challenge the tactics that we employ and how my guys operate, because we're that much better now. So don't be afraid to make those difficult decisions as a leader. Stand up and garner the support of your people. Don't do it in a vacuum, and you'll likely be successful. So with that said, though, again, there's no cookie cutter. I would say valuable aspects of being a leader that go hand in hand with that is, when you make a mistake, don't be afraid to stand up and admit to it either. That's how people learn. We're human. Like Mr. Perry said, humans do things. Humans make mistakes. It happens. But don't make excuses for it. Figure out a way to move past it, learn from it, and say, you know what, hey, I messed up. Here's what happened. Here's why I did it. This is what I was thinking. And you know what? It's not going to happen again. So, doing the right thing, is huge. You know, the beginning of our Leadership Under Fire talks about, you know, courage, cooperation, and composure. That cooperation has to happen. Cooperation is so deep, you know, you can talk about all the different things, and I kind of was highlighting there that we didn't have cooperation at that point within the unit. So leadership was absent. They weren't there to garner that cooperation, and you have to have that. So, you know, I often tell people too that, you know, I'm just a number. You know, when I'm gone, when I decide to pull the plug and retire, somebody else is going to replace me. So I can only do so much while I'm there. Being there for your people is huge, though. When you're absent, bad things happen. You know, when you assume, they've got it under control, that's not necessarily true. You have to be there for your people in good times and in bad. So I'll bring you a little bit forward to August of this past year. Actually, just a couple weeks before Jay's anniversary, we had a barricade on the west side of town, and ultimately, at the end of the day, we spent 5 to 6 hours negotiating with a woman who had her 5-year-old child that she was using as kind of a human shield throughout the ordeal. Back in the day, we could have engaged her immediately and probably never would have been second-guessed, and we didn't. We put ourselves in a very, very delicate situation where we were very deliberate in how we were dealing with this. And I've got different reasons for that, different opinions on that. I think part of it's the environment we're operating in. Nobody wants to be the big bad SWAT guy, you know, dressed up, you know, like a stormtrooper and shoot and kill a young black female with a 5-year-old child. Nobody wants to. And that wasn't our hopes that day. And ultimately, after 5 to 6 hours of trying to convince her to surrender, she didn't. She forced the confrontation. And the officer that wound up engaging her, unfortunately, that was his second police-involved shooting. He's a great guy. He's a great officer. He's been on the team a long time. But now he's faced with all this scrutiny of what happened. And we're still dealing with it to this day. And I'll sit here and tell you, I can't give you a lot of details because we're being sued and the whole 9 yards, but we did everything right that day. We did everything right that day. And now, unfortunately, I've got an officer who, while he can deal and he's come to terms and he's at peace with the decisions he had to make that day, we're not now allowing him to be on the front line anymore because we don't want him to have to go through a third police-involved shooting because he's already being scrutinized. You already shot one guy, now you shot this woman. What's going to happen if now he shoots another person, a third person, for doing what we trained him to do, for doing everything right? It's a very, very difficult time. So now he's trying to come to terms with, I'm ineffective. I want to get back in the saddle. I want to be back on the front line. I want to be doing what I'm good at, what I know, what I've trained to do, what I've done for the last 10 years. And we're saying, hold on, bud. We're trying to protect you here. And at the same time, we're trying to protect the interests of his family and the agency and ourselves. So you talk about a difficult thing to deal with. That's difficult. And I talk to him often, and I can tell it's not the same. So how do I deal with that? I'm still dealing with it. I don't have an answer for you, but I can tell you this. I've been there for him. I've called him. I've talked to him continually, and I'll continue to. I'm trying to help him any way I can. But I don't have the exact answer for you yet, but I'm there for him. You know, I'm not burying my head in the sand going, this will pass, this will pass, this will pass. You can't do it. So with that said, the pressures of the media, the pressures of politics come into play big time. And the stresses that come with that, in my world at least, are tremendous. We have an administration who, you know, is immediately asking for answers in regards to that. Why'd you do this? Why'd you do that? Why'd you do? Well, here's what we did, and here's how we did it, and this is why we did it. And for us, It all makes sense. For other industry experts that do what we do, we did everything right that day. But for a defense attorney and a family now suffering with the loss of their loved one, they don't want to hear that. They want somebody to be held accountable. Just listen to the news. We want justice. We want justice for this person. We want them held accountable for doing our job. So you talk about stress. How do we deal with that? You know, my guys get a couple hours each day to exercise. When I can, I tell them, get out of here, go relax, do your thing. My guys, at least on the SWAT team and some of the other assignments that I oversee, work like nobody else. I mean, it is unbelievable the amount of pressure and stress they're under. And add to it now the media immediately wanting answers, immediately wanting body-worn camera footage. Somebody had to have a camera on. I want the video, release the video. That's not the answer. You got to give us time to do our investigation, you know? And now, so as a result of that, my guys didn't have any body-worn cameras that day, back in August. Guess what? 12 of my guys have body-worn cameras. The rest of the unit will be outfitted with body-worn cameras in the next 6 to 8 months. Is that the answer? I don't think it is. Does it have a value? Yeah, it has a value on the street and to prevent misconduct and kind of keep things in check. But for a sniper that's 100 yards away, who's hidden in a hide, whether he's inside or outside and covered up with veils and everything, you know, a body-worn camera is useless. It's useless. It has limitations. But it's another stress my guys now have to worry about. They're talking tactics. They're talking cop talk. You know, they're talking, you know, this, that, or the other, and everything's being recorded. So, Freedom of Information Acts, is that going to get out? Are we going to be caught, you know, saying something we shouldn't be saying, or cop talk, you know, or something that somebody's going to try and spin on us? We'll see. We'll see. So yet, you know, just another stress. But as a leader, I have to convince my guys that it's going to be all right. We're going to get through this. This is not a big deal. And why? Because my guys are professionals. Because my guys do the right thing. Because my guys train and prepare and they make good decisions. In fact, like I said, in August, they actually put themselves in harm's way. And I wish we had body-worn camera footage from that day. Because if we did, people's jaws would drop at how patient we were and how deliberate we were and you know, the attempts we made to try and end that incident peacefully. So
I'm going to need to interrupt you, and we can cover questions, but I need to let our last panelist
absolutely, I'm sorry.
make sure that he gets an opportunity. But
yep.
Thank you for your comments. So our last panelist is Senior Chief Petty Officer James Hatch. Senior Chief Petty Officer Hatch served almost 26 years in the United States Navy, with 22 of those years in naval special warfare. He served multiple combat tours in various parts of the world and was a canine handler on several deployments. On his final deployment, the night he was critically wounded, a canine by the name of Remco saved his life while losing his own. He retired from the Navy in 2011. He has since dedicated his life to the training, care, and preservation of working dogs, to include being the founder and president of the Spikes Canine Fund. Additionally, he works with law enforcement and has adopted and cared for many former service dogs in need of medical attention. And again, the dog that is with him today is Mina. Please join me in welcoming both Senior Chief Petty Officer Hatch and Mina.
Thank you. This is quite an honor. And hey, off. She wants to talk now, but it's not her turn. Off. Off. I used to read books about Admiral Stockdale when I was a kid. And when I first heard about my opportunity here, I was kind of blown away because I was a middle manager guy. I was a tactical leader. I was an enlisted guy. And I thought, what can I really share? You know, what can I give? And I realized I actually can give you quite a bit. And I'm just going to tell you my story because I had good leadership. But one thing that Colonel Athens didn't mention is I have a master's degree in cussing. So my goal here is to, a leader told me a long time ago, you're either an asset or a liability. You're either bringing something or you're taking something away. So I want to be an asset and I don't want to cuss, yeah? Also, Mina has been trained. If you're falling asleep, she'll bite you. If your cell phone goes off, she'll bite you too. So just check your phones. So as the colonel mentioned, I was wounded in action, and my life was being a Navy SEAL. That's all I wanted to do. I didn't realize the extent of my commitment to it until afterwards, when I could no longer do it. And the way my career, as I call it, ended, was not the easiest way to go. It really, really was difficult. I really liked combat. I really did. I liked punishing people. It was a very fun time for me. I really enjoyed it. There are times when civilians get used as shields and get hurt, and that is ugly. All of those things come on board when things happen, and you're gonna have a reckoning at some point, someday. And hopefully you have the people around you that I did. So I got shot in the leg, blew my femur out the back of my leg. It was a hostage rescue mission. We were trying to rescue that young kid, Bo Bergdahl, that's been in the news a bit. And I will actually have to testify at his court-martial, or maybe the sentencing, I don't know, something. But bullet through my leg. Well, first, couldn't see the guys. I knew there were people out there. In a hostage rescue mission, you can't just shoot people. You got to see who's who in the zoo. It's at night. The visibility wasn't very good. And we used the dog to find those guys, and the dog found them. And the only way I knew that they were hostile was I saw one guy shoot the dog in the head, probably from me to the colonel, the other end of the table's down here. And at that point, I could see with the muzzle flash that he was armed, so I started filling him in, as it were, shooting him. And his buddy panicked, like they always do, because they suck. And he sprayed, and thank God he didn't hit the other two guys that were with me. But he hit me, and he didn't have the decency to hit me in the body armor that I had to wear all the time. So blew my femur out of the back of my leg, tossed me in the air, and I'm in the air, and I'm thinking, don't scream, don't. I was this close to these guys that were shooting at us. Don't scream, don't scream, don't scream. Hit the ground. What did I do? Wah! It hurt so bad, and I felt bad for years. I felt like such a weak individual for screaming. But man, it was powerful. At that point, I transitioned. I didn't know it, but I became an observer, a witness, as it were, to my crew and their spirit and their strength. Basically, I got to watch a bunch of heroes go to work. I'm laying there screaming. Guys had to finish the gunfight. I couldn't put my tourniquet on myself because when I tried to do it, my femur would twist and I would scream some more, which is bad. I wasn't really useless. I was actually a hazard. Because if you got a guy that's screaming around you, they just got to throw grenades in the direction of that guy, right? It was bad. I didn't want to scream anymore. So I didn't put my tourniquet on until the gunfight was over. Kid came over and said, hey, I said, put my tourniquet on me. I was his team leader. Lesson one to take away from this. So he put his tourniquet on my leg, and as he's tightening it, I said, okay, that's tight enough. Never listen to the guy you're putting the tourniquet on, because I was still bleeding. But he worked for me, so he said, okay, I'll stop. Didn't know it. Two people who had been to an advanced Army medic school heard me on the radio, or heard on the radio that I'd been hit, and they came from different parts of the target over open ground, having to shoot people to get to me, and they went to work on me and saved me. I got flown out, medevaced, sat there with the dog at my feet when the helicopter flew us out. These little things were etched on my hard drive. These are things that I had to deal with later. So I come back, I go through Germany. One thing that was really interesting in Germany, and it still affects me to this day, is I'm lying there in the bed and I came to, and this medical staff member walked in and handed me a quilt. And I said, what the hell is this? And she said, well, every person who gets wounded and comes to this hospital gets a quilt. There are people in the United States who make these quilts for the wounded people, and they send them over. And she had the quilt folded in a way that I could see the little placard on it that they'd sewn on these people who'd sewn the quilt were from Sheridan, Montana. I've never been there. Don't know any of those people. Later on, that little symbol helped me out. But at the time, I didn't realize how special it was. Get back to, well, I'm on the medevac, and this is the first time where I'm in the company of other people who had gotten hurt. And I realized as I'm laying there that I'm not hurt that bad. That there were people on that plane being medevaced with me that were severely hurt. People that didn't look like humans anymore. They were wrapped up in gauze, and they had hoses running in and out of them. Got back, came to Bethesda. I'm being pushed to the 5th floor at Bethesda by a young Marine, and he's breathing kind of hard. I'm like, hey man, how old are you? You're breathing awfully hard. And he said, man, I'm 23. I'm sorry, I've had 23 surgeries, but I'm getting better. And I didn't realize that was this kid's job now. He'd been in a Humvee that got blown in the air. He was a turret gunner, got blown onto the ground. Most of his crew had been killed, and he had shrapnel all over his body. And he was now pushing jokers like me around the hospital. I got to follow that kid a little bit, and it's pretty amazing to watch. So I talked about the combat heroism. And it's been said by some of the better leaders at this table that you don't have to be in combat to go through trauma. One night I stuck a gun in my mouth after I'd gotten treatment to get my leg healed up. I stuck a gun in my mouth in front of my wife, which is pathetic. I know how to use a gun. If I wanted to die, I'd be dead, right? It was a cry for help. I had become addicted to the pain meds, and I was washing them down with Stoli's vodka. Just a tip, don't do that. It's not a good way to go. Put a gun in my mouth in front of my wife. My wife was scared to death. She got the gun away from me. She immediately called my unit. My unit said, call the police, we can't get there quick enough. She called the police, told them exactly who I was in the world and what I'd been doing for the majority of my life, and that I was going nuts. And the police came to my house, and I told the captain earlier, I don't know a tougher time in my life where it's been tougher to be a cop than now. Those guys came to my house, they knew who I was, they knew I had guns and knives. They had every right to at least give me a good tasing or a beating, you know? They de-escalated the situation. They kept me calm until my crew got there. My crew put me in a car, took me to the Naval Hospital, where I agreed to go to the 5th floor, which is the psych ward. I was humiliated. I needed help, but I didn't know how to get it. I had alienated myself and pushed myself away from people. That's a sign, by the way, as leaders. When people start doing that, there's probably something going on. So there I am sitting in the hospital in my purple pajamas with a towel this big so I don't hang myself. And I'm embarrassed. I was a team leader on a SEAL team. I had over 150 direct action combat missions. I'd been in a lot of gunfights. I was proud of what I had done. And now I'm sitting in the psych ward with kids working there that have been in the Navy a year or two that are like babysitting me. I was so embarrassed. And my crew came to see me. And I was embarrassed, and I didn't want them to come see me. They had to put their uniform on. And in the SEAL teams, the only time you really put your uniform on is when somebody dies, or if somebody's getting a really big medal and somebody important comes to give it to them, right? These guys had to put their uniforms on to come see me. I never once realized how fortunate I was to that point in my life. Quick tip though, if you're ever in the psych ward, and God, I hope you never have to go there, don't do this. So my buddies came to see me. I'm embarrassed. They bring I'm a big skydiver. They bring these skydiving magazines in, and they hand them to me across the table. One of the young people that worked in the psych ward came over and said, sir, we got to take those magazines from you. And I said, well, why? And they said, well, they got staples in them, and you could hurt people with those staples. And I said, if you think I need staples to kill everybody in this room, you're one that's crazy. Don't ever do that. Never do that. Do not threaten the staff in the psych ward. Yeah? You'll probably get a good shot, and you're going to stay there like I did a few extra days, right? So if you remember nothing else from my little diatribe here, remember that. Don't threaten the staff. So while I sat there, my buddies had gone to work trying to figure out what they were going to do to me. People at my unit, very senior people were involved in my personal little saga. And it wasn't like their bandwidth wasn't full of other things, like other combat missions and other things going on with other people in the unit. But they showed me their value. I could not deny that they valued me. You mentioned value, it's very important. Because they committed so much to making sure that I got better. So I mentioned the guys that in the gunfight that came across open ground to rescue me. One of them I call the fly fisherman, the other one I call the mechanic. The fly fisherman was part of the people who were trying to figure out what they were going to do with me. And they decided on a civilian, kind of a high-end rehab/psych hospital that was quite a ways from where I was at the time. He, the same guy who'd saved my life in combat, he flew me, rented a car, and drove me to this psych hospital. See, you get a lot of medals in gunfights when you save people's lives. You don't get any medals for driving your buddy to the psych hospital. You know what I mean? That's a true commitment. Well, why would he do that? Because he cared about me. I had value, right? So I'm checking in to the hospital, and they're going through my bag like I'm a felon, and I'm offended by this because I'm a tough guy, Navy SEAL commando, and I look at my buddy and I said, hey man, I'm not doing this. I'm running. There's no way. He said, well look, first of all, you can't run anymore. What a jerk, right? Yeah, thanks for that, buddy. And secondly, you need to do this. You need to do this for yourself and for your family and for the rest of us that are coming down the road. And he was right. When somebody saves your life, you owe them a couple things. One, you can't disrespect them. And two, you can't make the efforts that they extended on your behalf a waste, right? So at that point, I realized that I was going into this hospital. It was a great thing for me. I spent a lot of time in that hospital. I think it was close to 4.5 months. And why it was great for me was that I realized that, and it's been said before by some of the smarter people here, you don't have to be in combat to have traumatic things happen. Here's my example. This was the turning point for me, one of the major ones. I'm in a group session. There are professional people from the civilian world in this group session with me. And they'd all been through tough stuff. And we're going around, we're talking about these things, and we get to a young woman, she's probably 30 years of age. And she said, when I was 11 years old, 2 of my uncles raped me in front of my father on Christmas Eve. What do I say to that? I've got problems. I got shot in the leg on a mission I volunteered for with a group of people that I loved, and I'm feeling sorry for myself. And this young woman is in here brawling with this. What do you think she thinks every year at Christmas Eve? Right? Amazing, unbelievable experience for me. She's doing great. That was a turning point for me. Life's combat, man. You don't have to be a Navy SEAL to have things happen to you that are difficult. Your people don't have to be combat people to have things happen to them that are going to make them go nuts. Yeah? So I graduate from this little hospital, and I go home, and I continue to get treatment, seek a counselor. I get retired from the service. My social worker through the VA was a cook in the Navy. She got out, she used her GI Bill, and she became a social worker. It's a pretty interesting combination. Big, tough commando, Navy cook. She's helping me. She helps me a lot. I call her St. Paula. Yeah? The point with all of that is that I didn't want help. I didn't want people to think I was weak. I didn't want people to know that I was suffering. I didn't want to suffer. And for a long time, I wished I'd have died that night. Because, you know, nobody hates dead people, right? You don't snore. You don't cause problems. They name a chow hall after you. It's all cool, right? I didn't know what I was going to be anymore. My buddies injected themselves into my life over and over, and they forced me to know that I was valued. So I give you that little chunk of advice that sometimes the word stigma is used. You know, there's a stigma with getting involved in people's lives. I call it cowardice. I watched my buddies, same guys who saved me in a gunfight overseas, I watched them save me again. They pushed through it. They weren't embarrassed. They knew that I needed help. It was that simple. And they were going to patch me up again. So I hope if you guys are ever in the position where you see that somebody's having a difficult time, you realize that maybe being embarrassed is the biggest risk if you confront them about it, but it's probably worth it. Yeah? So Mina says that she doesn't really care what you guys think, and the person who asks the best question, she will bite later with a bite sleeve if you want. Then you can take pictures. Thank you. Thank you.
So we've had 4 unique stories. There are 2 microphones, the chance to ask questions. I'll alternate between the microphones. We have a little bit of time here for questions, and you can either direct it to one of the panel members, or you can just have it an open-ended question, and we'll let them decide who should take it on. So we're going to start right there with you, young lady.
Hi, good morning. Thank you all for being here today. My name is Kathleen Larkin. I'm from Boston College, and this question is primarily for Captain Latchaw. I was just wondering, the Baltimore police has obviously faced intense criticism and scrutiny, and I was wondering how you're able to separate the constructive criticism from the completely unwarranted criticism and keep morale up while learning from maybe some of the constructive criticisms.
Thank you for your question. And just to clarify, so let me give you a little perspective. Baltimore County Police is me. That's okay. Oh. And we surround the city.
Okay.
So Baltimore Police, Riot Central, which I was down there for, we supported them. So we're surrounding. So we get a lot of spillover, though. So that's a great question. We have faced a lot of scrutiny, a lot of criticism. But what's very interesting is, in my opinion, and this is just my opinion, it's a very small percentage of society that has a very big voice right now. They have the media's attention, and I think the media garners a lot of the wow stories. So I think what brings me back is when I lay my head down on that pillow at night, I know that in my 23-year career that I've never committed any of those accusations that they want to commit or they want to accuse us of. The racial profiling, or the stopping, people just because in a traffic car, or the brutality. So, and I would speak on behalf of my agency as well. I've never seen it. I just haven't. Does it exist out there in certain agencies? It probably does. And again, just my opinion, there is a small percentage of society that the general public will never interchange with. They will never experience what that percentage of society is like. And that small percentage of society can be extremely violent, can be extremely nasty, can be extremely bad people. I think ultimately right now there's a big lack of respect just in general in the world. And I think that goes beyond just policing. I think it goes beyond how kids look at their parents, how maybe kids look at their teachers, law enforcement, how people interchange with each other. I mean, just drive down the highway. Just drive down the Beltway. If you're doing 55 miles an hour or doing the speed limit in the fast lane of the Beltway, how many people are going to give you the middle finger and blow their horn at you and cut you off and blow past? Really? I mean, so it's crazy. What I will say, too, brings me back, and I'll share a quick story. Myself and one of my compadres were in Chick-fil-A maybe a month ago, maybe 2 months ago, grabbing a meal. I kid you not, I've had more people buy me lunch, come up to me in the 25 minutes that we were sitting there eating lunch. I had 5 different people, we had 5 different people come up to us and say to us, "Thank you so much for your service. I appreciate everything you do." So for me, I don't need that. And I almost felt embarrassed, like, we got to get out of here, But that brings me back to knowing that at the end of the day, we're doing what we should be doing,
Thank you.
Thank you.
Does that answer your question? Okay, please.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Manal Chima, and I'm from Tufts University. So I've witnessed a lot of friends go through various psychological trauma, including family, and it's always very hard to figure out what to say to them or how to be there for them. And I was wondering if it wasn't too much, if you could share something that someone said to you or how they were there for you specifically that really helped you through those incredible experiences that you just talked about?
So anybody can take that one on. I'm just going to say, just to get as many questions as we can, if you keep your answers fairly concise, we'll kind of move from one to the other. Go ahead.
I think it goes back to the point of finding value. A buddy of mine told me one day, he's like, stop beating yourself up. You know, you may not be happy about certain things, but look, he listed out a whole litany of things that he noticed about me, and that put me back in a better spot. But sometimes there's really nothing to say. It's just really the presence that matters. The fact that you keep showing up, I mean, actions speak louder than words. But I think it always goes back to value, in my opinion.
Any other?
I'd say the same thing. Be there for your people and appreciate what they do for you. You know, and like I said, I don't need to hear it, but when the major or somebody higher ranking than me tells me, hey, you did a great job on that, I remember it.
Thank you.
Okay.
Good morning, gentlemen. Midshipman First Class White from Duke University. My question is either for Major Lampert or Senior Chief Hatch. You both talked about the role of leaders in recovery. Do you think there is a role, do you think that there needs to be a policy change at a higher level, maybe at the Secretary of the Navy level, to address the stigma that's associated with mental health in the military and the need for recovery?
Sure. Okay, I'll go first. So I looked at Senior Chief Hatch originally because he's been in longer than I have, and he's probably seen over time the differences in how the service has been, say, from the mid-'90s through now. So my experiences are coming in the late 90s is that nobody talked about that because nobody in this country, with the exception of a few elite units, have been to war since Vietnam. So there's absolutely been a sea change and shift, I think, big Department of Defense policy-wise. How that translates down into individual units, I think very much is a function of leadership. Units that have strong leaders that recognize that combat is complex and that recognize the value in human beings will be open and honest about the struggles they've had personally, the struggles they've seen, and the ability to get help for that and won't stigmatize it. Units that have immature leaders, leaders that want to wrap themselves up in whatever, some sort of false warriorhood or manlyhood thing, won't do that, and their folks will suffer.
I guess what I would say is, it sounds like you're talking about a kind of a program to get rid of the stigma. Here's my take on it. And I came from a very small unit, and as a veteran now, I give speeches to other veterans groups, people who went through similar things, I realized that I was treated really well, that I had really good people with me, leaders that took care of me. I believe that the solution to suicidal ideation, I'll just use that, is a personal, it has to be a personal. How many suicide hotlines are there? There's a lot. People call them and get put on hold, just so you know, right? The program, the little placard that's posted on the wall, and hey, if you have problems, come, that's not nearly as good as somebody just stepping up. The young lady asked, what can I do? Just be there. There's no magic word. My buddies didn't know what to say to me. They just were there. They forced me to get better. They got involved. So I would recommend creating an environment in your command, helping to create an environment in which people feel okay with talking about that. Here's a good example. After I got hurt and went through the things that I went through, let me say this. Before I got hurt, there were psychiatric people at our unit, and we were forced to go see them. And if anybody did go see them, they sure as heck didn't talk about it. After what happened with me, guys would be sitting in the team room like this, and they'd say, hey man, I'm gonna go down and see the psych. It became something that we just did because the environment had been created, because nobody wanted to do what I did, right? Does that make sense? I think creating the environment where people can just take care of one another, where it's okay. The major mentioned something about these false leaders, this warrior thing, we're all human beings, man. You know what I mean? Does that answer it?
Absolutely. Thank you, gentlemen.
Go ahead.
Good morning, gentlemen. Midshipman Fourth Class Keeper. So kind of bouncing off the last two questions, what's the right time to step in and say, I am here for you?
Now. Yeah, I mean, like as soon as you take over, in the middle of a workup, in the middle of combat, there's never a wrong time, I think, to say, I'm here for you. And there's all kinds of ways you can make that known, just by physically being there, by saying it, by providing resources, by doing the things that Senior Chief Hash and others talked about. Absolutely.
Thank you.
All right,
That's a good question.
that was pretty clear. Go ahead.
Good morning, gentlemen. Cadet Marie Novak from Virginia Tech. I had a question concerning cooperation. I know we talked a bit about that earlier. I was wondering what your perspective was on when a team might be resisting your initiatives. How do you work towards getting them to cooperate and work as a team?
I tell you, the people that I worked with, the leaders, they were invested, so we were invested. Sometimes they were invested in things that I didn't really want them to be invested in. I didn't like it. Did I whine and cry about it a little bit? Yeah, probably. Did I say bad things about them? Yeah, but it generally, almost always, turned out to be the right thing. So I think just as a leader, being invested is the way to go. Yourself. Commitment on your part. Live it, you know?
Great points, and I think to add to that also, there's always going to be a stigma. If you haven't been there and done that, who are you to tell us what to do? So work your way up through your commands, do that job, and it's not always possible, but do that job so then when maybe you are in that leadership role, you have an intimate knowledge of how that job needs to be done. And you have more respect, I think, as a result.
All right.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Morning, gentlemen. Cadet Graves, Attachment 90 at Liberty University. There's a lot of discussion of how culture and character impact a unit and are keys to success. I was wondering, as leaders, how do we foster culture and build character, these ideas of integrity and service and honor within our unit before combat so that during we can focus on the mission and after we can come back and really bring our men home whole?
I'll touch that. If I understand your question correctly, what I hear almost is how do you foster faith in your leadership?
Yes, sir.
So, all right. I bring an interesting perspective because I left as an E4 and I deployed as an E3. If there's any prior enlisted in the room, you know what that means. When I had a commander that respected us for us, and to be perfectly blunt, wasn't too high on their rank and their billet. That's the man that said to me, will you drive through downtown Ramadi tonight? And I said, no problem, sir. No problem. And it wasn't even our missions. It wasn't even our unit's mission. We were supporting another unit. And it was no problem. Every night in our tent, we would go to bed and hear the crunch of IEDs out. We would see the route clearance guys go out, come back. Their buffaloes and MRAPs were all blown up. We knew what he was asking us to do, and we did it because of how he led. Before we deployed, we were living in barracks, and only sergeants and above could have cars, and our commanding officer had his wife down there with him every day. We didn't have ours. You know, and then when he wanted us to do weekend ops, he and his wife were going to go away for the weekend. That spoke a lot. So how he acted versus how the XO acted. And the XO is the one that just treated us like the professionals we were. The XO got a lot more miles out of us than the CO did.
Thank you, sir.
Good morning, gentlemen. Cadet Ben Riley from Virginia Tech. My question for the panel is, following a traumatic event in a time-sensitive situation, how do you move forward with the mission if you know that the mental state of your team might affect the outcome of the mission?
Okay, I'll take first stab, but maybe first thing, and I've only got a couple of my own limited experiences, so I'll tell you what I did maybe a little bit, and maybe it'll help out. I was open and honest with everybody. We literally sat in a circle or a square and said, this sucked. And however, we are in the northern part of Helmand River Valley, and this is not a time to stop doing what we're doing, do something else, do something different. It's a time, if anything, to sort of redouble our efforts and kind of look everybody in the eye, and everybody else looks each other in the eye and says, yes, that's sort of the right thing to do. That helps to be sort of open and honest about that a little bit as well. Taking a look at everybody and getting a sense of how people are, looking for how somebody acts one day and then a change in that behavior, I think also gives you an idea of a key indicator that there's something going on. And particularly if it's a high stress environment, you're not waiting to say, well, I'm going to kind of like see what happens like the next day or tomorrow, and if that's just a sort of a fluke, you're going to sort of attack that problem right in the head. Say, hey man, what's going on? We can't afford to have a loss in effectiveness. We can't afford to do whatever it is that might happen right now. So I need you to be on board. Does that make some sense?
Yes, sir.
Those are some things that worked for me. Other guys might have some different.
I actually would like to add to that because the mission's why we're there, right? That's what we're doing. We're there to punish the enemy, right? And you're either an asset or you're a liability. And I'm going to give you a personal story again. I had good leadership most of my career. My first combat dog was a dog named Spike. It's who I named my little nonprofit after. Spike died one night in Ramadi when he was biting a guy, and I shot the guy, and the bullet went through the guy and killed him. Killed my dog. He was my best friend. And when we got back from that mission, I was a wreck. I wanted to kill everybody in the country. And my leadership said, hey, Jimmy, man, this has been hard on you, but we're going to send you home a week early. We're about a week from going home. And I didn't want to hear that. I mean, this was my identity, and I wanted to go out and punish people because my dog had died. And they said, no, you need to go home because you're not going to be an asset. You're wrapped up with other things. So having the courage to do that, it was the right decision. I didn't like it, but I respected them, so I did what they asked. I think being sensitive to knowing your crew, they knew me well, and being sensitive to them, I think you'll be able to answer that on your own when you get to that point. Does that make sense?
Yes, Senior Chief. Thank you,
If your
gentlemen.
mission is to continue, and you have somebody in your unit go home injured, how disappointed would they be laying on the bed in the hospital recovering if you guys just sat back and were upset that he got hurt? He'd be devastated over that. She would be devastated over that. That's something to consider as well.
On top of what Jimmy said, making those tough decisions as a leader, sometimes you have to make those tough decisions. And from my perspective, we're never going to rush back into anything, never going to rush back into it. I'm going to make sure my guys are set and ready to go. And we have the good fortune of relying on other teams, neighboring teams and other jurisdictions to cover at least the SWAT aspect or whatever we need. So relying on other resources because you have those relationships helps.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Go ahead.
Good morning, gentlemen. 4th Class Macmillan, 21st Company. Major Lampert, you told us during police summer that we don't want the enemy to see our behavior being weak, and that we need to display a countenance of strength all the time. And Senior Chief Hatch, you said that you don't want people to think you were weak when you were going to the treatment. So anyone can answer, but Major Lampert specifically, how do you encourage your Marines to respond right now to mental and physical damage from crisis situations while maintaining a message of toughness and resiliency to your enemies? Sorry.
Awesome question. So I would argue that the things we've talked about in terms of recovery and resources, that is not being weak, that is being strong. Because that enables you in a professional military force that's going to fight essentially a series of unending wars, which a lot of folks in this crowd wearing uniforms are going to do or have already done. You need to be able, this is beyond a marathon. This is like an ultra marathon, like an unending ultra marathon that never stops, ever. Cool? So you're gonna need to be able to do this over the long term. This is not something that, I can sort of plow through this for a week or 6 months. You're gonna need to do this long term. So I would argue that those things are not weakness. In terms of how that looks to our enemies, they absolutely do look at some of the things we do as weakness, and I'm sure that in the end you might have some colorful words for them, but that's their, like, too bad for them, because they're not smart enough to realize that we're looking to do this like long term, and we're probably going to win as a result of that, because we're not clothed in all of this sort of false narrative about what it means to be a warrior and what it means to be a man or a woman. We're interested in professionalism. We're looking at how do we do things now and how can we do them better, and we're actually really good at destroying our enemies. They're also really good at regenerating combat power, but that's a different discussion. Okay, so how do you make your Marines do that? I mean, I think that by recognizing those resources, you get that cycle down and you allow folks to focus on the combat things, the actual tactics, techniques, and procedures that are going to keep them alive and present that tough, hard warrior face to their enemies and not encourage your enemies to attack them more. So an example would be something happening in a unit where you have some loss. You're not going to cancel the next day's patrol. And I'll do a quick story and then move it along. I was, in 2010, my first go-around as a team commander in Afghanistan, I was like really badly wounded, like off of, like back here in Germany in Bethesda. And years later, I ended up talking to my team chief, a guy by the name of Master Sergeant Joe Lurs, and he was telling me from his perspective how that night felt like. And he told me a story about how after I gotten blown up and I was already carted off in a helicopter at his position, guys looked at him and said, Joe, like, what do we do now? He said, hey, they had an airdrop resupply that night. We're gonna pick up the bundle drops, resupply ourselves on ammo, and tomorrow morning we're moving to go continue to do what we're doing. We're not stopping. We're not memorializing people. That's not the time for it. You know, then Captain Lampert, he's fine. We're gonna do what we have to do to survive and continue our mission. I'll pass off to other folks at the table for that question.
All I would say to that is the leadership that was the best in my experiences in the military, their methodology didn't change between being home and training and being in combat. It was the same. It was the same level of commitment. It was the same emotional investment. And again, who cares what the enemy thinks? I'm going to come punish you, you know? That's what we do, right? Fostering that relationship, again, within your crew is very important. And as a leader, that's on your shoulders, man. You know what I mean?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Good morning, gentlemen. Midshipman 3rd Class Casey Baker, Naval Academy. This panel mainly focused on the after-action and the consequences of combat, but I'd like to ask a question about the pre-planning aspects before you go into a critical incident-prone environment. What is your personal ritual, or how did you best prepare for both the short and long-term consequences? Was that through prayer? Was that through laying out the possible scenarios? And would you do that with your men and women, or is that more of an individual ritual?
Yes, I'll run my mouth quick. I think as a leader, and again, I wasn't a very senior guy, I was a senior chief, and I had 7 guys in my crew. All I wanted to make sure of was that they knew that we were always there for each other. That was it. And whether they were ready, we were ready to help each other through prayer, or however an individual wanted to do that, as long as we all felt like we were all equally invested. Does that answer it?
Yeah, what I'll add to that is there is sometimes becomes a comfort with combat. You know, you've done it X number of times a little bit. My ritual was to not let us get comfortable with that. So it doesn't matter how many helicopter raids we did. We all dumped batteries out of our nods and put fresh, our night vision goggles. We put fresh batteries in every night. We changed radio batteries every time. We did comm checks. We made sure that charges were made the right way. We double checked each other. We never got to say, hey, I've made a charge 1,000 times and I know how to make it. Like, no, you're going to get it double checked, and you're going to get somebody's actually going to write on the little piece of the actual main charge and not the initiating device that it's good to go. It's the correct weight for what you're supposed to do. And those kinds of things, always make sure that you sort of keep sharp in that regard.
I would agree completely. I mean, your preparation, the way we prepare, you guys prepare, you train and all, it should come second nature to you, that it's just another day at the office, really. But not to be complacent. And then the biggest thing from a leadership perspective, in my opinion, is you can't panic. You just can't panic. You've got to have a level head and be able to lead those guys. You're spazzing out, they're going to spazz out. They're going to get nervous and bad things will happen.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Good morning, gentlemen. Midshipman 2nd Class LeBon, United States Naval Academy. Thank you for sharing your experiences. Some of you touched on individuals who brought value to your lives, and they showed you that committing to your people is important and bringing value to what they're doing is important. And those people specifically in your lives who brought value to everything you did in your jobs, do you see value in them showing that specific commitment maybe 10 years removed from the situation, or even when you're better?
Absolutely. So I'd still encourage everybody here to look up Major Michael Weston, USMC DEA. The carry-down effect from how he talked to me as a captain in the Marine Corps to a Lance Corporal, I had never, ever experienced that before. Quite frankly, I didn't after either. He was, hands down, there's probably only like 2 people on the list, and he makes up 50% of the list of people I would jump in front of a bullet for. And unfortunately, I can't because he's deceased. But when he was able to use his leadership style to see all the value that I brought to the table, understand that I wasn't just a Marine of a certain rank, of a certain MOS, and understand that because I went a very weird route into the military. I was 26 years old as an E3 but deployed. And he came to me, and I had already had a bachelor's degree when I got there. And he came to me and he said, hey, you've got that degree. I need you to look at this PowerPoint for me. Now, granted, this man had graduated from Harvard Law School and joined the reserves his third year in Harvard Law because he was flying home on a plane, saw a bunch of Marines in their Charlies, thought they were Mormons, and started talking to them. He was awesome. I mean, and then he goes, yeah, sure, I'll do it, joins, and then takes a commission. I mean, the guy would get sick on purpose so he looked like a junkie and then do undercover busts in Richmond. I mean, he was just that kind of guy. He would do anything, but he was not beyond who you were, if that makes sense. And what he asked me to critique was going up to some pretty high levels and had something to do with like the water levels on the Euphrates River from the Boreal. I don't even know what I was looking at. I actually edited it. That's the crazy thing. And when I went to say to him, hey, sir, I switched, he's like, you got it, it's no big deal. Well, I hope I didn't flood a small village. But the thing about it is, though, what he did, and that I really do, what he did was come to me and say, was validate who I was from the ground up. And to that point, from everything that he saw and then some. And that I was able to pass on to people that worked for me, people that worked with me, students who I taught, co-workers who needed to be picked up to be able, what that guy did in that literally 30-second conversation, I still do today. And I'm going to continue to do. Partially in his honor and his memory, but at the same time because it was literally 30 seconds of investment that not only made a better Marine, it made a better man. So that's why I would absolutely say that 10 years later, what you do as an officer will have lasting impacts.
I still stay in touch with many of my commanding officers. I went down to meet the prosecution for Sergeant Bergdahl, and I had to go through the whole situation, relive it again, and I was very emotional. I was driving home from it. Who did I call? I called the fly fisherman, because he, years before that, twice had demonstrated that he cared, right? I was out of the military, but it stuck with me, just like you're talking about. I don't think you really realize how valuable some of your personal exchanges are with people. By the way, I talked to him and he straightened me out and I made it home. I cried a little bit, but Mina was with me. It was good.
You're going to learn through your life experiences everywhere you go, and you've already have. You've learned from your mother, your father, and company people here, your supervisors here, your team leaders. You're going to learn what to do, what not to do, what you like, what you don't like, and you're going to adapt some of that yourself, and you're going to decide yourself, man, I really hated when that guy or that girl did that. I'll never do that to my people.
So unfortunately, this is going to be the last question, and it's going to have to be a short question with a short answer. But I'm sorry for the ones that are still online, but go ahead with your question.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Okay. Thank you for your time this morning, gentlemen. I'm Jacqueline from Bucknell University. So this is a bit of a more in-depth question, so if I can talk afterwards, I would appreciate that opportunity. However, what do you see as the way forward in rehumanizing the way our police force interacts with our communities?
Somebody dropped something. What's the question? I'm sorry.
What do you see as the way forward in rehumanizing the way our police force interacts with our communities? There's a bit of context that I did want to get to first, so if we...
So this could be a very long answer.
Could be.
So
I'd be happy to talk to you after if you want.
Yeah, it'd probably be best if we connect you at the end to have that conversation.
Since it's me specific.
I want to just make a couple of closing comments as we wrap up today. Listening to the panel, there are a couple of key elements that came up over and over again. Number one, this idea of adversity and trauma is not just about the military and law enforcement. It can cover every single area. I was thinking as some of the folks were talking about a corporation not very far from here who had a key element member of their corporation who committed suicide, and it had a devastating impact on that corporation. So this is not just about combat, but it certainly applies full bore when you think about combat. Number two is this idea that we as leaders are responsible for helping our people understand their purpose and value before crisis, in crisis, and after crisis. That's very clear by what was said up here. Number three is the idea of digesting these experiences. As a leader, your responsibility to help people understand what they just experienced, whether they have to go on immediately or whether there's an opportunity for a pause. Leaders have to be involved in that. They can't hope, as it's been said, that the problem goes away. And number four is the idea of resources. You alone are not going to probably have all the resources that are necessary, particularly after a crisis, to deal with it. So you've got to be aware ahead of time what some of those resources might be, and it's worth that study. I'm going to mention two other books. There's a book called Achilles in Vietnam by Jonathan Shea that looks at the Elliot and compares it to Vietnam and looks what happens when leaders don't really do their job very well and the impact that it can have on people. Again, it's a military-oriented book, but I think it can be used by others. Achilles in Vietnam by Jonathan Shea. The other one, particularly for our military audience, is written by Carl Merlantis, and it's called What It Is Like to Go to War, talking about preparation before, during, and after conflict, what it is like to go to war. Merlantis wrote a novel called Matterhorn, which is a historical novel sort of about the Vietnamese War, really about his experience and the PTSD that he experienced for many, many years. And he's got one of the few books out there that really pulls together how this is all supposed to work. I'm going to tell you, you were blessed by having these four panelists because they had a lot to add. I know if we had hours, we would keep going because they would continue to be able to instruct you. But I'd ask you to give them a hand for their time and their insight.
Gentlemen, thank you for your insight on the topic of combat leadership. As a token of appreciation from the Naval Academy Leadership Conference, we'd like to present y'all with a small gift.